Hi there. Before we start, tell me in the comments which country and city you are listening from. My name is Dana Whitmore. I am 34, founder of Whitmore Industrial Solutions. You would not notice me on the street. I do not do coffee meetings. I do not do small talk. Everything I do happens behind the scenes. Quiet people see structural failures long before anyone else does. And that is exactly how I saw my own downfall coming, even before the man who caused it learned my name. That morning, I was sitting in a maintenance review at Vanton Steel Logistics, working as their third-party mechanical analyst. My supervisor, Warren Lott, stood at the head of the table, tapping a stack of reports like a judge preparing a sentence. "Tom," he said, "this workflow is embarrassing. You are dragging the team backward." Tom, who had given more than 20 years of his life to this company, cleared his throat. "I followed the steps you approved last quarter," he said softly. Warren did not even blink. "Procedure or not, you are dead weight." The room froze. No one defended Tom. Warren was the kind of man people feared more than they respected. He waited a beat, savoring the silence, then moved on as if he had not just crushed a man in front of a full team. I felt my pulse shift. He had not said it to me, but the meaning was obvious. People like Tom were supposed to be safe. If he could erase Tom with one sentence, the rest of us were nothing more than parts he could swap out. 2 hours later, HR summoned me. The coordinator avoided my eyes as she pushed a folder forward. "Dana, Vanton is ending your contract due to restructuring." There was no explanation beyond that. There never is. I signed, the pen steady, my voice steady. Everything steady except the thought repeating in my mind my father's voice from years ago. When I came here, I was looking for a job. I can do that again. I walked out of the building with the folder pressed to my side, feeling something shift inside me. Quiet but unmistakable, the beginning of a plan taking shape. The severance packet felt heavier than it should have, as if the papers inside were carrying all the years Vanton Steel Logistics had just erased. I set it on my kitchen table and pressed my fingers against the cover page, tracing my own name like I was learning it again for the first time. I opened the folder slowly. 15 years of contracts, midnight system failures, emergency calls, and quiet saves turned into a single check and a paragraph thanking me for my dedication. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. "This is what I get for keeping the place running," I muttered. The numbers were clear. Severance, a small payout from unused consulting hours. Nothing close to what the work was worth. I pulled my laptop closer and signed into Whitmore Industrial Solutions, the side business I had been building quietly for years. The account balances loaded my savings, a thin business account, and a modest line of credit I had opened 2 years earlier but hardly touched. I grabbed a pen and scribbled the totals on the back of an envelope. "Severance plus savings, plus the credit line," I whispered. Together, it made just enough to do something real, if I was willing to risk everything I had left. My father's voice surfaced, steady and unshakable, the way it had always sounded when life cornered him. "When I came here, I was looking for a job. I can do that again." He rebuilt his life twice, once after a factory shutdown, once after an accident that ended the only trade he knew. Both times he stood up without asking anyone for permission. I closed the severance folder, not with defeat, but with a sense of direction. Everything I needed was already on the table in front of me. What mattered now was how I chose to use it. I kept replaying Warren's voice in my head, dead weight, as I opened the supply chain file I had copied during my final week with Vanton Steel Logistics. If he could dismiss a man like Tom with 2 words, then he had no idea how fragile his own kingdom really was. I scrolled through the distribution breakdown until one name appeared again and again: Hollow Ridge Transport, a mid-sized logistics carrier based in Dayton, Ohio. I leaned closer, reading the percentages twice to be sure. Nearly 65% of Vanton's steel components moved through that single company. One carrier, one artery, one choke point. Unbelievable, I whispered, pulling up the financials I had stored over the years. Hollow Ridge was falling apart. Their trucks were overdue for replacement. Fuel costs had eaten half their yearly profit. Management disputes were clogging operations like rust in a gearbox. They were holding the entire supply chain together with tape and stubbornness. I opened another document, an old report I wrote that Vanton ignored. You will lose production days if Hollow Ridge collapses. I had warned. Warren dismissed it with a smirk and the predictable line, "They'll survive. Carriers always do." But he was wrong. They were not surviving. I started piecing the data together: fleet age, debt load, contract history, vendor dependencies. Then I saw it the owner had been looking for silent investors for almost 2 years. Not corporate giants, not hedge funds. Someone smaller, someone who understood logistics enough to fix problems rather than bury them. My heart kicked hard in my chest. If someone bought a majority stake in Hollow Ridge, they would gain control over Vanton's entire distribution rhythm. Every shipment, every deadline, every panic meeting Warren loved to lead while pretending he ran the world. I sat back in my chair, the Severance folder still on the table beside me. For the first time since losing my job, the path forward did not feel abstract. It felt sharp, clear, and already within reach. Graham Latimer looked older in person than he did in the photos attached to Hollow Ridge's public filings. 30 years of running a transport company had carved deep lines around his eyes, the kind that come from worrying about payroll, fuel spikes, and engines that refuse to start in the middle of a winter route. He shook my hand with the tired grip of someone who had carried too much weight for too long. "You came alone," he asked. "I always do," I said. "Gets me clearer answers." He gave a faint laugh and motioned toward a chair. "Clear answers. I remember when this place used to run on those—" We sat across a dented metal desk in his cramped office. The walls were lined with old route maps, faded photographs of drivers, and a calendar stuck on the wrong month. Graham rubbed a thumb along the edge of a folder as if bracing himself. "I know why you're here," he said. "You see the numbers? Everyone does. Banks breathing down my neck. Drivers leaving for better pay. Engines with more miles than I want to admit. I am tired. Dana. I am not ashamed to say it." His honesty landed heavier than any financial report. "No corporation will touch us," he added. "We look too messy on paper. They want fleets that shine. I am not a corporation," I said quietly. "I am offering a fast sale. Clean transition, but I need controlling interest. 70%. Graham's eyes flicked up sharply. For a moment, he searched my face as if deciding whether I was serious or reckless. "That is a bold number," he said, "and bold numbers usually come from bold people." He leaned back, studying me longer than felt comfortable. Then he nodded, almost to himself. "You remind me of the man who built this place long before I ruined it," he said. "Let's sign the preliminary agreement." We put our names on the papers with 2 slow, deliberate signatures. His hand trembled slightly. Mine did not. The morning I wired the last portion of the payment, my hands were steadier than they should have been. It took everything I owned, my savings, the severance check folded in my kitchen drawer, the small equipment fund I had guarded for years, and a modest loan approved only because the bank believed Whitmore Industrial Solutions had growth potential. Every dollar moved with a finality that left no room for second guessing. Graham called the moment the funds cleared. "It is done," he said. "Hollow Ridge is yours." Hearing it sent a tight rush through my chest. 70%. Not a partnership. Control. A shift in power so sharp it startled even me. I drove to the yard that afternoon, the contract copies still warm from the printer. The drivers greeted me with cautious nods, unsure what kind of owner I would be. I introduced myself simply, told them nothing would change overnight except the things that needed changing immediately. Inside the office, I began sorting through the financial records Graham had left behind. The numbers told a story more alarming than any rumor I had heard. Vanton Steel Logistics owed Hollow Ridge several months of transport fees, late payments pushed into vague processing delays, and ignored invoice reminders. I let out a slow breath. Warren and his team had been starving their own supply chain without realizing it. Assuming Hollow Ridge would keep operating out of loyalty or desperation, now those debts were mine to collect, and refusing to carry new unpaid loads gave me leverage no one at Vanton had imagined I would ever hold. That evening, I updated the internal protocols, froze new credit extensions, and called the lead dispatcher. "We stabilize schedules first," I said. "No one runs extra hours unless they are paid for it." The real weight of ownership settled onto my shoulders, then solid, undeniable, and exactly what I had planned for. The first sign of trouble at Vanton Steel Logistics arrived less than 48 hours after I finalized the purchase. A dispatcher at Hollow Ridge hurried into my office holding a stack of messages. "Dana, Vanton is asking why their outbound cycles are delayed," he said. "They sound nervous." I took the papers from him. The delays were not mine. They were the automatic compliance holds triggered by their unpaid invoices, months of ignored debt finally catching up. "Tell them we are following contract terms exactly as written," I said. "Nothing more, nothing less." He nodded, still watching me like he expected me to soften. I did not. By late afternoon, another message appeared in my inbox, this time forwarded from someone inside Vanton. A client had emailed Warren directly. "Why is Hollow Ridge refusing overnight cycles?" Warren replied with a frantic tone I had never seen from him, trying to blame scheduling errors, supply chain shifts, even weather. I answered none of it. I simply enforced the contract they had treated like a suggestion. When I finished the last round of updates for the day, I drove past Vanton's headquarters on instinct, the same way you check an old injury to see if it still hurts. The building stood tall against the night sky, and the top floor glowed with bright, unbroken light. The CEO's office, still on, still working. I slowed the car and watched the windows for a moment. Something had finally reached them, the realization that the supplier they dismissed as small, messy, or replaceable now controlled the rhythm of their entire operation. Warren had no idea yet that the person tightening the screws was the same woman he had quietly pushed out. I rolled the window up, shifted back into drive, and let the building disappear behind me. Silence served me better than any explanation ever could. The email from Vanton Steel's board arrived just after sunrise. It was short, too carefully worded, and signed by someone who had never contacted me directly before. They were seeking a conversation at my earliest convenience. Those were the exact words, and I had heard that tone enough times to know what it really meant. They were not inviting me. They were cornered and hoping I would not notice. I replied with a simple confirmation and drove to their headquarters without telling anyone at Hollow Ridge. A receptionist escorted me upstairs, her smile tight, her eyes bouncing between me and the conference room door like she expected sparks to fly the moment it opened. Inside, several executives sat arranged like chess pieces. Warren Lott was among them, red-faced and already glaring at me as if my presence violated some unwritten rule of hierarchy. "You asked to speak with me," I said, taking the empty seat at the table. One board member cleared his throat. "We have concerns about recent disruptions. Hollow Ridge plays a critical role in our operations, and we need clarity." Warren leaned forward before I could answer. "This is a reaction to her termination," he snapped. "She is trying to punish us." I did not raise my voice. "I am enforcing the contract your company breached for several months. These," I slid a folder across the table, "are the unpaid invoices you ignored. These are the compliance holds triggered by your own delays. And this," I added, opening the last page, "is the dependency ratio showing how much of your distribution relies on Hollow Ridge." The board members studied the documents silently. Warren continued to sputter beside me, but no one backed him. Several turned toward him instead, their expressions sharpening. The shift in the room happened without sound. subtle but unmistakable. For the first time, Warren realized I had not come to embarrass him. I had come to show them the truth he had kept hidden. Warren kept talking over me the moment the board finished reading the documents, his voice climbing in pitch as if volume could repair months of neglect. "She is misrepresenting everything," he insisted. "She has a personal vendetta. Hollow Ridge is exaggerating delays to make us look incompetent." I kept my hands folded, letting him unravel. When he finally paused long enough for breath, I opened a second folder I had brought with me. "These are internal emails written by Warren over the last 14 months. I said. "He calls his drivers replaceable overhead. He instructed dispatchers to push overnight cycles without compensation. And he told the finance department to delay payments to Hollow Ridge because, and I am quoting, they will keep running even if we ignore them." A board member lifted the paper closer to her glasses. Warren's shoulders sank as each line was read silently around the table. I leaned forward. "I am offering two paths. The first is a clean restructuring timely payments, contract compliance, and transparent communication. The second is lawful withdrawal of Hollow Ridge services, publicly, with all documentation intact." The room held its breath. Even Warren stopped speaking, one by one. The board members exchanged looks and nodded. The chairperson spoke last. "We are voting to remove Warren Lott from all leadership roles, effective immediately." For the first time since I walked into the building, Warren looked directly at me, not with anger, with fear. He realized the ground had shifted because he had kicked out the wrong person. The chairperson cleared his throat. "If you are willing, Ms. Whitmore, we would like to discuss a leadership opportunity. I am not here for a position." I said. "I want a partnership, one that works the way it should have from the beginning." The board agreed, and for the first time in years, the balance finally felt honest. The first morning after the board meeting, I walked through the Hollow Ridge yard before anyone else arrived. The sky was still dim, but the place felt different, lighter, as if the air itself knew something had shifted. I had power now, not the kind Warren chased, but the kind that carried responsibility in every direction. By 7, the drivers began filing in. Some nodded politely, others carefully, like they were waiting to see who I would turn into now that I owned most of the company. I gathered them in the dispatch room. "I am not here to squeeze more out of you," I said. "If this company grows, you grow with it. That starts today." I laid out the changes: plainly pay transparency within 90 days, new benefits phased in over the next quarter, fair routing without forcing anyone into unsafe hours, and a modern tracking system that would replace the outdated software they had been cursing for years. The room stayed quiet at first, but it was the kind of quiet that listened, not doubted. A driver named Cooper finally spoke. "You really doing all that?" "Yes," I said. "Not as promises, as policy." He let out a breath that sounded like he had been holding it for months. Other drivers exchanged glances, the guarded kind that slowly shift into hope. By the end of the week, Vanton Steele honored the new terms and wired the overdue payments. The finance officer called to clarify a few line items, but his tone held a respect that had never been there before. They needed Hollow Ridge to run clean, and they finally understood what clean actually meant. With the first month of improved cash flow, I created a training fund named after Tom, the man Warren once called dead weight. Tom had always talked about older workers getting pushed out of an industry that still depended on them. The fund focused on helping them certify, retrain, or return to work without fear of being discarded. When I finalized the paperwork, I sat alone in my office for a long moment, letting the quiet settle. For the first time in years, I was not rebuilding someone else's system. I was building one that deserved to last. I did not ask for revenge. I asked for respect. But sometimes, to get one, you end up earning the other. By early spring, Vanton Steele was running smoother than it had in years. Their calls to Hollow Ridge shifted tone no demands. No disguising pressure as urgency, just clarity, cooperation, and an unfamiliar sense of humility. Even their CEO reached out once, his voice stiff as he thanked me for stabilizing their distribution chain. I told him the truth. Hollow Ridge stabilized itself. They simply stopped standing in its way. Warren Lott made one last desperate move. He filed a wrongful termination claim, insisting the board had acted out of personal bias. A week later, he received the decision. "Your claim is denied," the letter stated. "Your removal was based on documented misconduct." His name disappeared from the internal directory that same day. A colleague from Vanton called me privately. "Warren wanted you dragged into it," he said. "He thought confronting you might save him." "I have nothing to say to him," I replied, and I meant it. Whatever battle he imagined fighting, it was over long before he realized it. My focus stayed on Hollow Ridge. The first quarter brought higher margins than expected, and my dividends were enough to expand operations into 2 states, Indiana and Kentucky. When the paperwork went through, I felt something settle in me, something steadier than victory. One afternoon, I visited the first training class funded through Tom's program. Older workers sat in a semicircle, listening to an instructor explain new certification standards. Some looked nervous, others determined. Every face reminded me why I had started all this in the first place. Cooper waved me over. "They are here because of you," he said. "They are here because someone should have been looking out for them a long time ago," I answered. As I left, I heard my father's voice again, not as a warning this time, but as a promise he had passed down to me. When I came here, I was looking for a job. I can do that again. Now, I finally understood what he meant. I had stopped looking. I had started building,